Two people walk across a stage on the same weekend. One is in a cap and gown, holding a diploma that cost $80,000, about to start a job that, if you actually read the listing, never once mentions needing that specific degree. The other is holding a trade certification that cost $4,000, walking straight into a job that starts Monday morning, paying more than the first person is going to make for the next several years combined. Here's the number that should stop you mid-scroll. Both of these people did everything they were told was the responsible thing to do. Only one of them ran the actual math first. This isn't a video telling you college is a scam, or that a degree is never worth it. Some of them are worth it many times over. It's a video about the fact that college isn't one investment, it's thousands of wildly different ones, wearing the exact same cap and gown, and almost nobody separates them before signing the loan paperwork. Let me show you the math. My name is Alex, and I spend a genuinely unreasonable amount of time looking at where people's money quietly vanishes to, and sometimes at the specific piece of paper it vanished into. If you've ever wondered whether your degree, or the one you're about to go into debt for, was actually worth what it cost, hit subscribe, because today on Wealth Adjacent we're running the math nobody wants to run out loud. Before we go further, a quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor, this isn't financial advice, and I am absolutely not telling anyone that education doesn't matter, or that college is inherently a bad decision. What I am here to do is separate the emotional case for a degree from the financial one, because they get treated as the same argument constantly, and they are frequently not the same argument at all. Let's introduce someone. Marcus, mid-20s, graduated 4 years ago with a degree he genuinely enjoyed studying, in a field he assumed would lead somewhere specific. He's not naive. He did the normal things, applied to jobs, went to career fairs. He just never ran the actual break-even math before enrolling, because nobody in his life framed it as a math problem in the first place. They framed it as the obvious next step after high school. Let's start with the number, because it is genuinely a little unhinged. Return on investment for a college degree varies enormously by major, school, and total debt taken on, to the point where averaging them together into a single "is college worth it" statistic actively hides more than it reveals. Some specific degree and career combinations pay for themselves within a couple of years. Others, once you account for the actual debt taken on and the 4 years of income not earned while studying, take well over a decade to break even, and a meaningful share never fully close that gap at all. Let me say that again. College, as a single category, isn't one investment decision. It's thousands of different ones, with wildly different returns, sold under one shared cultural story that treats them all as interchangeable. Where does that gap actually come from? The commonly repeated advice, get a degree, any degree, it'll pay off, was formed decades ago under very different cost and labor market conditions, when tuition was a fraction of what it is now, and a bachelor's degree alone carried more relative scarcity in the job market. That advice hasn't been recalculated to match current tuition costs or current degree saturation in a lot of fields. It's simply been repeated forward, generation to generation, as though the underlying math hadn't changed at all. And here's the part that should make you sit up. A significant share of recent graduates report working in a field unrelated to their degree, and a notable share report their current job doesn't actually require a degree at all, despite one having been listed as a requirement when they applied, or despite them believing it was necessary going in. Multiple studies comparing lifetime earnings by major find some fields carry a meaningfully negative return once total cost and foregone income are properly accounted for. Once you're honest about what 4 years of not working and the loan payments actually cost, not just what the diploma itself cost to print. But an expensive degree by itself isn't the trap. A specific field with a weaker return is just a specific field with a weaker return. Here's where it becomes a trap. A significant share of students choose a major and a school without ever comparing the expected salary in that specific field against the total cost of attendance for that specific school, treating getting a degree as the decision, rather than treating the specific combination of major, school, and debt load as the actual decision being made. And the genuinely uncomfortable stat sitting right next to it. A notable share of borrowers report they would have chosen a different major, different school, or skipped a specific advanced degree entirely if they'd known beforehand what their actual starting salary and debt load would look like side by side. Read that twice. People are discovering the real math only after the loan is already signed, when the information that would have changed their decision was available the entire time, just never actually assembled into one place before they had to choose. Back to Marcus. His specific degree, at his specific school, cost him just over $80,000 once loans and interest are accounted for. His current job, the one he eventually landed, pays a salary that's genuinely reasonable, but doesn't require his specific degree at all. Several people on his team have different backgrounds entirely. Running the actual numbers, factoring in what he could have earned working those same 4 years instead, plus the interest on the debt, plus the years of loan payments still ahead, the true cost of that specific choice sits well north of what most people assume when they picture the price of college. He is not the exception. Most graduates who eventually calculate the true cost of their specific degree, not the sticker price, the actual total including foregone income and interest, are surprised by how much larger the real number is than the one they had in their head when they enrolled. Now here's the part that turns this from an education problem into a psychology problem. And this is the part that should genuinely fascinate you once you see it clearly. Choosing a major and a school happens at 18, an age when almost nobody has the lived experience to evaluate a decades-long financial decision properly. And it happens under enormous social pressure to simply pick something and move forward, rather than to slow down and run a comparison that feels almost rude to make explicit in the moment. A researcher studying identity and sunk cost investment found something almost too honest. Once someone has publicly committed to a specific field of study, questioning whether it was the right financial decision starts to feel like questioning their own judgment or identity, not just reassessing a number, which makes people meaningfully less likely to reconsider even after new information. A weak job market in that field, a lower than expected salary, makes the original math look considerably worse than it did at 18. And then there's the specific mechanism that makes this particular trap so persistent. The decision gets made once, at a single moment, under time pressure, application deadlines, financial aid deadlines, and then the consequences arrive slowly, over years of loan payments, which means there's never a single moment that feels like the mistake happening. Just a long, diffuse stretch of monthly payments that never quite forces a full recalculation of whether the original decision made sense. Now, before we go further, we still haven't gotten to the specific factors that quietly determine which side of this math someone ends up on. Hold that thought, because first, the smaller signals. Let's talk about the phrase that should trigger alarm bells the moment it shows up during college planning. Any degree helps, it shows you can finish something. That phrase isn't entirely wrong, but it quietly erases the actual cost difference between a degree that leads directly into a specific, well-paying field and one that doesn't. Treating a 4-year, $80,000 credential as roughly interchangeable with a much cheaper, faster alternative that might demonstrate the exact same can-finish something signal to an employer. Then there's the degree inflation pattern, where jobs that never structurally required a bachelor's degree started listing one as a requirement anyway, simply because a larger applicant pool made it possible to filter that way, which means a meaningful share of degree requirements floating around in job postings reflect employer filtering convenience rather than any actual skill requirement of the role itself. There's a school cost version of this pattern too, worth naming specifically. The same degree, in the same field, can carry wildly different total costs depending on which specific school it's earned at, and the salary difference between graduates of a more expensive school and a considerably cheaper one, in the same field, is frequently much smaller than the tuition gap between them, meaning the more expensive option doesn't always buy a proportionally better outcome, even though it's often chosen specifically because it feels like the more serious, more real choice. And then, the layer that catches people hardest, the opportunity cost of the 4 years themselves, which rarely gets included in anyone's mental math at all. 4 years not working, even at an entry-level wage, represents real income and real early career experience that a fully financial comparison has to account for, not just the tuition bill, because the true cost of a degree was never just what you paid the school, it's what you paid the school plus what you didn't earn while you were there. There's a graduate degree stacking version of this pattern worth naming too, since it compounds the original math rather than resetting it. Adding a master's or other advanced degree on top of an undergraduate one that hasn't yet paid for itself extends the break-even timeline further, not because advanced degrees are bad. Several fields genuinely require them, but because stacking additional debt and additional foregone income on top of a foundation that hasn't broken even yet means the combined number has to work considerably harder to ever close the gap. And very few people run that combined calculation before enrolling in the second program. There's also a community college transfer pathway worth mentioning briefly, since it's one of the more overlooked ways to run this math better without changing the eventual degree or field at all. Completing general education requirements at a considerably cheaper institution before transferring into a more expensive program for the specialized years can produce the identical final degree from the identical final school at a meaningfully lower total cost, a path that exists for a large share of fields but rarely gets presented as the default option during the excitement of choosing where to apply. All right, here's the section nobody wants anywhere near a calculator when an acceptance letter shows up. Let's do this through Marcus, because abstract numbers slide right off the brain. Say instead of his specific $80,000 path, Marcus had pursued a considerably cheaper credential more directly tied to a specific in-demand skill, entered the workforce years earlier, and invested the difference between what he actually paid and what the cheaper path would have cost, plus those extra years of earned income, into a simple index fund. Left alone to compound, that redirected amount alone would likely be worth more today than his current degree has added to his lifetime earnings so far. And that gap only widens further the longer both paths continue. Here's the framework I want you to carry around. The sticker price on a degree was never the actual cost. The actual cost is tuition plus interest plus 4 years of foregone income, compared honestly against the specific salary bump that specific degree at that specific school actually produces in that specific field. The real question was never, is college worth it in general? It's, does this specific combination of major, school, and debt load break even, and in how many years? And now here's where it gets almost cruel. If any degree reliably produced a strong financial return regardless of field or cost, the blanket advice would hold up fine. It doesn't, reliably, across the board. Research comparing return on investment by specific major and school combination finds a genuinely enormous spread, some combinations paying for themselves several times over, others sitting flat or negative once true costs are included, which means treating get a degree as a single, universal piece of advice quietly averages together some of the best financial decisions available with some of the worst. Now, let me keep my promise, because I am not telling anyone that college is a mistake or that only immediately lucrative fields are worth studying. I can already hear the objections because I get them every time I make a video like this. First, but education has value beyond salary, personal growth, critical thinking that has to count for something. Completely fair and genuinely true, this isn't an argument that the only value of education is financial. But notice the actual distinction being made. That value is real and worth naming honestly as a separate category, rather than being used to avoid running the financial math at all, since both things can be true about the exact same decision at once. Second, but some fields genuinely require an expensive, specific degree. There's no cheaper path around it. Also fair, and worth naming directly, for fields with a hard credential requirement, the math shifts specifically to comparing schools and debt loads within that requirement, not whether to pursue the credential at all. The actual answer was never skip college, or any degree is automatically worth it. It's run the specific break-even math for your specific combination before signing the loan paperwork, not after. There's a third point worth naming honestly too. Some of the value a specific school provides genuinely comes through networking, alumni connections, and recruiting pipelines that don't show up cleanly in a pure salary comparison. And for certain fields and career paths, that access is a real, if harder to quantify, part of the return. That's a legitimate factor, not a reason to skip the math entirely, but a reason to weigh it honestly and specifically, rather than using it as a vague, catch-all justification for any price difference between schools, regardless of how large that difference actually is. So here's the framework I'd actually use. I call it the break-even check. And you can run it in about 20 minutes before enrolling, or even after, if you're currently deciding whether to continue. Research the realistic starting salary for your specific intended field, not an optimistic best-case figure. Calculate the true total cost, tuition fees, interest on any loans, and a reasonable estimate of 4 years of foregone entry-level income. Divide that true cost by the salary difference your specific degree would realistically produce compared to not having it. That gives you a rough number of years to break even. And if that number stretches well past a decade, that's real information worth having before signing anything, not a reason to feel ashamed of a decision already made. A few practical moves fall out of that. Research actual employment and salary outcomes for your specific intended major and school, not the general reputation of the school as a whole. Compare the total cost of your top choice against at least one meaningfully cheaper alternative in the same field before committing to either. Factor foregone income explicitly into any cost comparison, not just tuition. And if you're already partway through or already graduated, run the honest number anyway, since knowing your real break-even point changes what a smart next financial move actually looks like, even if the original decision can't be undone. So here's where we land. The college degree trap isn't a story about anyone being naive or making an obviously bad decision. It's a story about an entire category of decisions, wildly different from each other in actual financial terms, getting sold under one shared, comforting cultural story that treats them as roughly interchangeable. The data doesn't say education is a mistake. What it says is quieter and far more useful. Some specific combinations of major, school, and debt load are genuinely excellent financial decisions. Others aren't. The only way to know which one you're looking at is to actually run the number, instead of trusting the category it's wearing. And if you're Marcus right now, doing that math for the first time and not loving what you're seeing, hear this clearly. You're not naive, and you didn't make an obviously bad decision at 18. You made the decision everyone around you was making, using a piece of advice that was true decades ago and never got updated to match the actual numbers you were walking into. Of course, you didn't run a break-even calculation nobody ever told you existed. Seeing it clearly now is most of the battle, regardless of which decision already happened. So Marcus runs his real numbers, adjusts his monthly payment strategy based on the actual break-even timeline instead of a vague hope it'll work out, and starts treating every future education or credential decision for himself or eventually his own kids as a specific financial comparison instead of an automatic cultural next step. The degree doesn't unhappen. The math around it just finally gets looked at honestly. Run the specific number before signing anything. Skip the blanket advice that was never actually calculated for your specific field, school, or year. And the next time someone says a degree is always worth it, ask them which specific one, at which specific school, compared against what. If this helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever actually calculated the true break-even point on your own degree? I'll see you in the next one.